that's a good reason to go into fields like philosophy and the social sciences. Yeah. But yes, it's a different philosophy, and a lot of active learning methods are grouped together: problem-based learning, service learning, the case method, and so forth. They're all the thing about the case method is it provides a way that you can keep the faculty load of doing something interesting a little bit more under control than, say, trying to run 30 different real-world projects in a class, which is a wonderful experience if it's done properly, but is a huge demand on faculty members.
Well, the other point from the student's point of view is each case is temporally bounded.
Right, that's right. Yeah, they can, and once you're over that case, you can move on, to the next. That's exactly right.
So even if you botch one, you're not in any.
Right. No, that's right, and it's a great place to experiment. One of the things that I encourage my students to do in the case method is to really try things out. Try out perspectives that aren't your own, just to see if you can produce an argument for them. Before we get to evaluating learning, let me just say that the most fun I had at Harvard Business School in any class was in a class on cost accounting that I was put into because I couldn't get into any good class. All my choices had been taken. And I was not interested in cost accounting. And frankly, the cases weren't all that interesting. But the first day of class, I made a point, and a fellow sitting about 3 seats down from me disagreed with me. Ken Hicks was his name. All right. So the next class, he made a point. And I violently disagreed with him on that point. And for the entire rest of the semester, as soon as one of us made a point, the other would violently disagree with it. Now, the irony of all this is actually we became very good friends and we agreed on practically everything. So that meant the person who got called on first got to make the good point, and the person who called on second had to make the sucky argument. I still remember, though, the last class, I made a point. He agreed with me. I raised my hand and had to disagree with myself. By the way, I think he's now the CEO of Foot Locker, as I recall. But at any rate, the thing is, that was a great learning experience because, it's one thing to make an argument for something that you believe in, but it's quite another to have to make an argument for something that you think is absolutely stupid. That takes some skill. So, how do you evaluate learning? Let me just underline this. Judgment is hard to measure. It is really hard to measure judgment. Part of the reason we developed this undergraduate capstone course is we got an NSF grant to try to build this course. And we've been trying a number of instruments. The NSF Critical Analysis of Thinking instrument, we've tried it. We showed positive gains in every area, none of which were statistically significant. Now, there were a lot of different areas, so it's amazing that we got positive on each one of them. This is a pre-test, post-test. But really, there was one statistical significance thing, reading graphics. Well, since we don't do anything reading graphics in the course, that didn't seem to me to be a very useful finding. Basically, the only thing we get statistical significance on is stuff that we don't teach. That suggests we're doing harm rather than good. We've developed some instruments based on mini cases, and these actually worked really well. What we did is we created 2 mini cases, and at the beginning of the semester, half the class got one case, half the class got the other case. At the end of the semester, we swapped them over, so half the class got the other case, and half they each got the different case. Then at the end, I packaged them all together. Always the same order, the A version and the B version. And then I handed them off to external evaluators, both in my department and outside the school, and they had to decide which was done second. And then they also ranked each case on 4 different criteria, the same criteria that the CAT used. Well, we saw statistically significant improvements in all of those. I was a little disappointed, though. They only got the pre-test, post-test right 71% of the time. Both sets of external evaluators came up with the same number, but for different cases. It suggests this isn't exactly a science, but at least it shows that our students learn something. We've also used student assessment of learning gains and student evaluations. These were extremely positive. And then finally, I've been using direct observation, which is the pre- and post-case reports. Do the students, after discussing a case, do they seem to have learned something? So these are the types of things we do. But I'll tell you, this is the fundamental challenge of the case method, because it's a lot easier to test facts and simple skills than it is to test the ability to reason.
I've always thought that doing an evaluation, say 6 months or a year after, would really give you some good information.
Yeah, and we tried that once, to evaluate our program. So we had everybody from our program put together some questions from their course, and we gave it to the students. And what we discovered is that the students were scoring at about random guessing level for all the courses they took at the beginning of the program. Thereafter, we decided it was more sensible to test them at the end of the course, which is a sad commentary, but this is, since you're forced by regulatory law to report assessment of learning gains, we have an academic learning compact. It's not just a document, it's a compact in this state. So it's tough. You're right. Go ahead.
As you said here, evaluating learning is more of a judgment phase. At the same time, the class participation score is 50 to 90%. How do you deal with the great arguments? And the students come to you and argue anytime.
This is interesting. I have never had a student come to me and argue about their participation grade. I think all of them are aware of how much better they could have done, and so they're afraid to bring the subject up. I honestly, I can't understand it. And by the way, at the beginning of this class, I actually asked the students, hey, do you want me to use a well-defined rubric, or do you want me just to use a fuzzy grading based on my subject? How many of you think they chose the rubric? How many of you think they chose the fuzzy grades? Virtually everybody, like 80%, wanted fuzzy grading. They didn't want me to tell them how I was grading it. Well, it was fine by me, because half the time I don't know.
Do you tell them the grade at the end of the semester, or is it on a weekly basis? How did the student come to
The students, for the pre and post test, I grade them satisfactory, weak, or excellent every week. So they're seeing those things. But those things, I tell them, don't really count much for their grade. The only people it counts for is people who have been very, very quiet in the course. Sometimes, and this is something that can be cultural, there are some cultures that simply feel that speaking out loud in class is a bad thing and contradicting the professor is unthought of. Fortunately, I usually have a lot of people in my class who think that contradicting the professor is a really good idea, and I tell them it's a good idea because I like to be contradicted. Great being an academic. Yes, go ahead.
How do you determine matrix for success in your case studies? These are the case studies that you're making up, and so when you're looking for a set of responses, I understand that judgment is difficult to evaluate, but how do you come up with a set of parameters or matrix for the success of what you think the case study is?
Oh, good heavens. I can't even imagine how I could come up with a matrix of parameters. And truthfully, I don't even know if a case is going to be effective until the first time it's been discussed. Now, mind you, I bring quite a bit of experience to the table, but my judgment of whether a case is successful depends entirely on how the discussion goes. And it's very important. I do not look for specific things. In any given case, there are probably a dozen things that are really worth discussing. If you force the students to discuss them all, suddenly you're lecturing because you have to move them from item to item to item. So when I find something that's getting good discussion, I'll linger on that topic until the discussion starts to fade, and then we'll move on to another topic. Why? Because 3 good discussions within an overall case discussion is going to be much more memorable than 12 rush discussions.
So it's not getting to the objective, or is it in the process of...
But the objective is the process. The objective is the process of reasoning and thinking about these things. I don't expect them to come out of these things with any particular knowledge of content. I mean, our cases are all over the map. Among the cases, we had one of a laser thing that prints on produce boxes with information technology. Another was a disaster relief company that was trying to turn the software it developed for Hurricane Katrina into a social network. Another was a local IT services firm. Another was a firm called Interscope that basically uses biometrics to try and judge TV commercials and so forth. I mean, it's a whole range of things, but what's common is all of them had decisions to be made.
So these are not cases for real clients?
These are definitely all real cases.
So when you go to the client with a solution, what do you present them?
I don't give them a solution. They understand that what I'm trying to do is I am trying to present them, I am trying to create a case with a decision that needs to be made. And the way I started, and I'll talk about this when we get to the actual constructing of cases, which we'll actually get to fairly shortly. The first thing I ask is, okay, what decisions are you making right now? You know, what are your challenging decisions? Don't give me a decision that you've just made and you're happy with. I mean, I say it more tactfully than that, but what is on your mind? And the thing about it is that during the process of doing this, often they will bounce ideas off of me. And we had one of the company, Disaster Solutions, that's trying to turn this thing into a social network. They found the first discussion actually caused them to change their whole strategy. They literally came into the discussion. This was with my master's program discussed it for the first time. They came in and they totally changed their strategy. They will frequently call me up and bounce ideas off of me. This is, I guess Dr. Mueller is not here, but this is a classic example of researchers being involved in the process. And when you're writing a case study, these companies are giving you access to all this information. They're giving you access to their time. Why? Because you have some expertise that you share with them during the process. And if your expertise has a significant impact, then one of the things you may do is in the case you may write, well, a consultant suggested such and such, when you're really talking about yourself, because you want to describe the thing as accurately as possible. This actually is a good segue into case writing. And in your packet, I think one of the things you'll find is the initial document that I create. And by the way, these are all, if you download the electronic version of the book or if you get a paper copy of the book, these are all appendices. But the first thing I do is I basically give a set of frequently asked questions to the client. Why participate in a case study? And the classic way an academic would go into something like this is say, well, because it'll be extremely beneficial to our students. But I also like, and I use that, but sometimes that is not enough. Sometimes companies are looking for an outside perspective on what it is that they're doing. And so we offer that outside perspective. One of the companies that did a case study, an IT services firm, which was started by a graduate of our school, the small business only had 5 employees. Well, it's just hired 2 of the people in that class to work with it. And why? They were so impressed with the discussion. They actually, and the students were so impressed with the company, they contacted the company and said, hey, can we work for you? There's nothing better than having a local company who you have studied for 2 hours and discussed for 2 hours. You can do a much better job interview that way because now you've got a pretty good idea of what the context is. Another interesting thing, and this is, I guess, a little bit more about outcomes, but I'll just mention it, is that of those 11 new cases we developed, in 10 of them, the protagonist from the company sat in on the discussion. And you can usually get them to do that the first time you discuss a case. But if you want to have that happen on a regular basis in your class, you've got to keep producing local cases. And so I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but that's just sort of a quick look. So, at any rate, so why would you want to have a case? Well, I emphasize the fact it doesn't cost the company anything. They're getting objective insights from the case developers. They're helping the students. I'm very clear about the fact that if they do not like the case study, and they tell me they don't like it, that case study goes in the wastebasket and never sees the light of day. Up until they release the case, they have complete control over it. And only once have I been burned by that. I once spent about 40, 50 hours developing a case on a large company, and the president told me he had the authority to release the case, and he was very happy with it, but he passed it on to the CEO, a fellow named Morocco, and he said, well, why should we allow this case to be published? It makes our business look too good. They were a subprime credit card company. And holy mackerel, I had no idea what a racket that was. But, you have no idea. If you have a subprime credit card with a $500 credit limit, chances are you're paying over $500 in fees a year for the privilege of having a $500 secured credit limit. Oh, it was terrible. But at any rate, so that's the only time, and that's probably out of 40 or 50 cases that I've written. So most of the time you establish a good enough relationship so that that's not a problem.
Just when you wrote that case, did you become aware that there was something, or at that time, no?
Did I become aware? Well, I became aware of how much I disliked the business, but I wrote that case back in 1998, so it was not. This was before, this was before all the blow-ups occurred. And subprime credit cards is different from subprime mortgages, which was another racket, but I never wrote a case on those. And understand, I was writing it on the information technology system, but this is of that company. But that's one of the great challenges and one of the great thrills of case writing. You're constantly going in and exposing yourself to new businesses. Right now I'm working on a case study on Infosys' knowledge management. This is, I never know what the next case study is going to bring. Question over here, yes?
So this kind of teaching approach is about solving problems, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, but students do not get frustrated because at the end of each case study, there is no one decision or one or two possible best solutions among the 1 trillion. And what the students would say at the end of the course, we did 20 case studies, we discussed, we had pros, cons, but we never delivered solutions to our problems. We put time and effort, and you see, it's about result. Where are we going with this?
Well, but you see, I would say, and it really depends on the type of student, because you will always get a few students who are looking for the right answer and get very frustrated. But frankly, the most common, and I got a very, very strong evaluations for this course, so it went pretty well. This was 45 students, which is a lot for the first time doing an undergraduate case course. This was pretty terrifying to have that many people. But the more common comment I get from students, and this is both in the pre-case and in the evaluations, is I never realized how much I didn't know, or I never thought about things that way. So they recognize that it's helping them think about things in different ways. And of course, I constantly emphasize the fact that there is no right solution. And I have been known occasionally to crack a few jokes at my own expense regarding the fallibility of professors. I like to point out for them that I started a business in 2007 that involved leasing RVs, which means I bought an RV to be leased out. I managed to acquire the one asset in the world that had all the negative characteristics of both a home and a gas guzzler at a time when gas went up to $5 a gallon and the home market was collapsing. So I encourage them not to think of me in any way as infallible, because, boy, you don't have to know me very long before you realize that's far from the case. But they also becomes clear that there are lots of bad solutions, and they realize, I should have thought of that when I proposed doing X, Y, Z, because that really doesn't make any sense in this context. Yeah.
Have ever your students convey to you that once in a while they do need a lecture to reinforce or explain something that they didn't understand in the case or what they read on their own?
Well, what I would say is, maybe because they're too scared of me, I don't know. They don't typically offer me strong, constructive advice like that. Remember, however, that most of the classes that I teach are capstone classes. So it's not really my job to give them new information. But I will tell you, in a lot of the cases, like we had a very technical case involving a security company here in Orlando that developed a new technique for encrypting stuff. Well, 2/3 of that case involves understanding the technology and how that particular encryption scheme works. So that a lot of times in the discussion, the first thing we have to do is we have to discuss to make sure that people are on the same page regarding what they read about. And that's one of the nice things about IT-related cases, is often there is a substantial amount of intelligence that's inquired. And one of the things that I require in my cases is that they be readable, that people can understand them. Even if they should have had the material, in many cases, they have forgotten it. So, we had to review encryption in that case, and we added some exhibits and stuff so to make sure that they could understand it.
I was under a similar method in HBS. I was in IMB in Lausanne. And for a whole year, everybody insisted there's going to be no lectures. It was fun. And for cost accounting, I used to get totally lost.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. So then cost accounting was, for me, it was such an alien subject.
Yeah.
Somebody tell me what,
Yeah, I agree completely. Basically, you would spend hours trying to figure out what all these damn numbers mean. But,
that's right.
but on the other,
and
so,
he was teaching us there.
we've had similar expenses, and that's the reason why I don't think the case method is the solution for everything. However, I think it's great for capstone experiences, and it's great for helping students think about their helping students develop better skills for judgment. So, at any rate, so far I've found it to be pretty easy to get people to join me for case studies. I have typically focused on small businesses, and small businesses I think are great for case studies for a number of reasons. One, your students can frequently identify with a CEO of a small business, because whereas they may not see themselves as being the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, they can often visualize themselves as being running a small computer services firm or a restaurant or something like that. So there's that advantage. The other advantage is small businesses typically always have a strategic component to it. There are very few small business cases that don't involve strategy, and the people you're talking with are the ones who have the ability to affect strategy.
I'll give you a third one. Information is localized.
That's right. It's much easier to do. I think a large company case, it might require 40 to 60 hours of research
flying
in
around
real
the
time.
country.
Whereas when I was at Harvard, as a graduate student, I had a $10,000 travel budget. That was more than my department had at my first university, because it was expected you do that kind of travel. Another thing is you get much faster. I would say I can do most of my data gathering in a small business case, depending upon the particular context, in 8 to 10 hours. It doesn't take that long. It takes longer to write it up and get it approved and that sort of thing. But because the data is all there, it's a lot easier to get at. And then, finally, they really need your help. They want your help, and they come to your classes. And so, my belief, I'll get back to that later. Let me just quickly, I'm not going to go through all the stages of the case checklist, because it's a long document, and frankly, you can read the summary here for the case checklist, and also in the book, if you download it or if you get one of the paper copies, I have several chapters where I go into much more detail in these things, better than I can in a lecture. The first thing that you need to do, though, in case writing is decide what type of case you're going to write. I'm working on this Infosys case with my department chair, and when we had our first meeting on it a couple of weeks ago, he said he wanted to write a discussion case, but in fact, everything he said suggested he wanted to write a research case. And so, we had to clarify that because it makes a big difference. Because if you're doing a research case, the question is, what have you done recently and what have you achieved? Because you want to basically do a study of some change and what happened when you made that change. That's what most research cases look like. Whereas if you're writing a discussion case, what's on your mind right now? That becomes the, what decisions are you trying to make right now? And I would say for at least half the cases we had in our fall semester, in our spring semester, the decisions had not been made at the time we discussed the case. It was really interesting, and the decisions don't have to be earth-shattering decisions. The most successful case we had based on the student evaluations was a simple case about a woman engineer who was trying to decide whether or not she needed a website. And it turned out that was just a wonderful discussion, because a lot of times people take it for granted you need a website, but in the nature of her business, it wasn't at all clear that it would benefit her. And I think ultimately the conclusion was probably the best reason for her to get a website was so that she controlled her presence on the web, as opposed to having other people create her presence on the web. But it was a wonderful discussion, because it wasn't an easy question. So, at any rate, decide what type of case you're going to write, but remember that when you start writing a discussion case, as time progresses, you can often revisit that and turn it into a research case as the discussion and its consequences take place. So what you are trying to do when you write a case is not only to produce a document, but also to create a relationship through which you can, which will benefit both parties in the future. After that, there are lots of different types of cases. I personally like authentic cases. So I like cases where everything in the case is the truth to the best of my knowledge. Occasionally I will disguise numbers or names of employees and stuff like that. But if I have to make material changes, then I typically will move on to another project. Because if I have to make material changes in a complex world, I'm not sure that I'm describing reality anymore. It's possible to create cases from public sources. One of my best research cases was actually done entirely from public sources. I just happened to notice a similar pattern in two very different companies. And when you're doing research cases, there are two things that make for a really good research case. If you can find two sites that look almost the same, but are having very different outcomes, there's almost certainly an interesting story there. If you can find two organizations that are very different but are experiencing the same phenomenon, there's an interesting story there as well. So, because that suggests that this phenomenon may be generalizable. If you find two similar organizations that are having very different outcomes, that suggests that phenomena that you might think were generalizable maybe aren't. But at any rate, it's possible to write cases, but for my classroom use, I virtually always create cases that are based entirely on authentic situations. So when you have your first meeting, with, and this is, I've moved on to like stage 3, first meeting of the case. You want to get some background about the organization. You want to prepare for the organization. It's much easier today than it used to be, because now companies have websites and you can Google them. In the old days, that was much harder. Yes?
I think the first thing, you kind of like these cases as to this research discussion and so forth. Isn't it quite the case that a case could have several aspects of this?
Oh, sure.
I'd
Usually.
like to see one where you can incorporate all these elements.
Well, you can. It's just that what I would say is there's a danger of mixing them. You can, just the way I did with the Three Little Pigs, you can take a given situation and repurpose it in three different ways. But what I would encourage people not to try to do is not to try to have a case that's all things to all people. Because it's just going to be very hard to have a discussion case if there's not a decision being discussed. And on the other hand, it's going to be very hard to have a research case if you've got something that's entirely open-ended. And similarly, cases that are very complicated are not necessarily going to be that easy to discuss. You need very, very experienced people if you want to create a discussion like that. So, but I think that's a very valid point. The thing that I recommend is preparing, for the first meeting as best you can. The more general experience you've got in business, the better. This is an interesting thing about case writing, is that, whereas in traditional scientific method research, the researcher is supposed to be very distant, and not involved in the process at all. In case writing, one of your big sales points is that you can help them think about things. Yes, you had a question.
Maybe this is something that you're going to cover later, but I was wondering if there was some kind of a document, agreement, terms of agreement between you and the contact person or the company that spells out what your responsibilities are going to be, what they're going to get, what they can expect, and vice versa, so that there's, as you're building that relationship, there's some kind of clarity and understanding there.
Yeah. What I would say is there's typically a release agreement at the end. And I have a copy of a release agreement later in the packet. That basically gives you the rights to the case. But in general, if you are dealing with an organization that wants something contractual, the next thing that's going to happen is they're going to want to send it through legal. And then you better hope that decision is not going to be made in the next year, because it'll take that long to percolate through. Now, this is something that a place like Harvard has a huge advantage in, because they've got the reputation so that someone at the CEO level will shepherd it through legal. But for those of us at the University of South Florida, as soon as I hear it's going to legal, I say, okay, well, let's not plan on this one this semester, and I move on. What I do is offer to sign any kind of non-disclosure agreement they want. And if you find a company that has had a lot of cases done on it, then that's often much easier. They don't require all those things. Infosys is a good example. One of the reasons we got the Infosys is they've had dozens of cases written on them. And as a consequence, they know the process. So we just signed a big non-disclosure. They were happy to work with us. It hasn't been written yet. It hasn't been released yet. But I feel confident that process will go smoothly because they've got experience. But you can get some ugly surprises if you get halfway through a process and then you start to get legal documents thrown at you. And you don't want to be writing your own legal documents, because your university will hang you out to dry if they feel that you're usurping their right to do everything legal. Oh, jeepers! We had a project where our university. We had a student project that was agreed to with a local company. They were going to work on the company's internal website. And our university had a document that insisted that we have all intellectual property rights for the stuff our students created for this company's internal website. Well, honest to God, that just basically killed the project, a great project for 3 students, and made us look completely like idiots. But this is, of course, business school professors are not the best place to go if you want to find people who are in love with the legal profession. So at any rate, the first thing you want to do is get a topic. And when you're dealing with research cases, it's finding the research topic that makes sense. When you're dealing with discussion cases, it's finding the decision that's of interest to the protagonist. I have met a lot of case writers who go in determined to research a specific topic, even when they're writing a discussion case when they go into a company. I have never seen that lead to a good case, because you don't want to be manufacturing decisions. And there's also a risk, because every company in its heart of hearts wants a special type of case known as a showcase. A showcase is the kind of case that they put up on their website saying how great they are. And with a showcase, you don't want to write a showcase because a showcase is not good for discussion. It's usually not even good for an example, but it's terrible for discussion because basically discussion is, oh, look what a good job they did. Yes, I agree. They did a wonderful job. I would like to agree with Jack. They did a fantastic job, and there's only so much agreement before nausea starts to set in. So, you always have to convince the company. You say, no, please, because we realize you've done this great thing, but really for our students, we need a decision. I have to admit, in one instance, I was truly a smooth-talking devil, and I got someone to put in an email that he had sent to an employee that never in a million years would I have exposed to the public, but I explained how beneficial to our students it would be. And we're still very good friends, me and this guy, but he had one of those nights when he was pissed off at the employee, and all of that went into the email, and the whole case was about I came in wanting to write a case, or he wanted me to write a case about their new information system, but the case I actually wrote about was the fact that he was trying to decide whether or not to fire his programmer, and his programmer was trying to decide whether or not to quit. And so the A case was the story told from his perspective, and the B case was the story told from the programmer's perspective. The programmer was a former student of mine. I could never have done that if I didn't have personal relationships with these folks. But the fact is, it was very, it worked out really well. However, it did cause me one inconvenience because he was in the mortgage business, and there were some various legal issues involved with some properties, and someone found the case on the web, and the next thing I know, I'm subpoenaed to testify as an expert witness. Because in the case, I described him as a very talented mortgage person, and so their contention was, well, if someone is very talented in the mortgage business, then shouldn't he have been able to detect this thing? And so here I am. But fortunately, as a professor, I can go on saying absolutely nothing for an extraordinary period of time. That's one of the great job skills that this gives us. All right, I won't go through all these other things because I want to sort of sum up with some of the stuff that I think that's really important about this. But what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to figure out how you're going to gather data, work with the person you're working with. Sometimes they like to control the process. Sometimes they just tell you, have at it, here's our drive. You want to figure out how the case is going to get reviewed. What I like to do is when I get a quote from someone in an organization, I like to send them an email with a quote in it before it goes into a draft that their boss might see. Because I don't want to, my goal here is not to shaft people. Oh, this is about you. But some companies want to see the draft before anybody sees anything. And so you just have to clarify the process so there aren't any misunderstandings. You want to understand who's going to release the case, and you also want to make sure that if it's published, you let the company retain the rights to make their own copies. You don't want to be telling them, sorry, that if you now this case is published, you can't copy it on your own. Most publishers, if you've got an agreement like that with the company, they're going to say, oh, that's fine. But if you don't have an agreement like that with the company, they'll backpedal. So, those are things. And these are all listed in the checklist and things that you can read about more in the book if it's of interest. So, then I have a sample release document in here, I think, somewhere towards the end. The goal is to make the release document, or maybe not. Maybe that's up on my website, but I guess maybe I forgot to put it in this one. My apologies. But, and my website has electronic versions of all this stuff, plus, as I say, the electronic versions of the book. I'll give you the address of that later. Okay, before we just leave the writing process, just understand that there are places that you can publish both discussion cases and research cases. Most journals in the social sciences will accept research cases if they're well done. But for discussion cases in particular, if Journal of IT Education. It's discussion cases. This journal has just been launched. It's got 10 cases that should appear within the next week. Our first round of cases. I'm the editor-in-chief, so anytime you've got a case idea or you want to do something, you can send me an email first, because I like a heads up before I get a submission. The Journal of IT has some teaching cases. They have both discussion cases, example cases, exercise cases. They've got a broader range of cases than the Journal of IT Education. The North American Case Research Association publishes cases from all domains, not just business domains. And these are all discussion cases. It's interesting, they call themselves a Case Research Association, but almost everything they do is discussion cases. The European Case Clearinghouse is the major distributor of cases in Europe, but they accept outside submissions. I think on my website I've got a link. They just reviewed my book, Informing the Case Method. And then there are a lot of conferences that will publish case studies, at least in my area of information systems. Decision Science Institute publishes case studies, both discussion and research. ISIS, the International Conference of Information Systems, publishes case studies. If you were in a field like management, the Academy of Management publishes discussion cases. Of course, the heavy hitter in business discussion cases is the Harvard Business School Case Clearinghouse, or HBS Publishing. They reportedly account for about 80% of all the case sales in the U.S., but they don't accept outside submissions. But these places all do. If you're publishing the sciences, I encourage you to go to this website. Their cases are almost totally different from the discussion cases that I've been talking about, but they're wonderful. There's some wonderful exercise cases there. And they're all mainly available for free, and they publish and peer review them. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the broader impacts of all this and where I think this fits in, because this is what really got me interested in this, and this is why I suggested that we have a case track to our host. And, I believe that one of the fundamental problems that we're facing in academia right now is the fact that we as academics are increasingly disconnected from practice. We're disconnected from other disciplines. This is why we need interdisciplinary, but we're also disconnected from practice. And I believe that the case method can be extremely powerful in connecting us to practice, provided that we as academics not only use other people's cases, but write our own cases and also do case research. Because it is working the three together that helps build the kind of communications that we will need if we want to actually impact practice. So here is, from the teaching point of view, here's sort of the way I view a typical lecture course. Presumably, practice provided some little bit of input to the researcher who's writing the textbook. That person provides some little input to the instructor who's using the textbook. The big information flow is from the faculty member to the students, and because we're talking about a lecture course here, this is pretty much a one-way flow. And, of course, as your students are hired by practice, they take some of the lessons you taught them in the classroom, maybe, and move them into practice. My light arrows are hypothetical connections, and the dark arrows are connections I'm pretty sure about. Now, we move into a case method course of the type that I have described, and we start to see some substantially different arrows. First off, after you have facilitated a few cases, you realize you are learning as much about the case from the discussion as the students are. And that's not an exaggeration, because you come in with a lot more context, so you learn more from little details than they probably do. That case research I talked about from on two different companies, the financial services company and Mrs. Field's Cookies, which was my biggest, most successful case research project, all done from public data. The inspiration from that came from the fact that I discussed those two cases one after another in class, and after a couple of semesters, I realized the two discussions always seemed to go about the same way. And so I thought, well, maybe there's a story there, and that actually was the inspiration for the research. Your students are learning from each other. There is no question that during the discussion, learning from other students is every bit as important as learning directly from the instructor. Again, hopefully the students are taking some of their knowledge into practice, and presumably, at least, the person who wrote the case got a lot of information from practice in writing it, and maybe gave some information back. That depends a little bit on the nature of the person who wrote the case, because there are still some case writers who believe that they should be observers and should not actively participate in the process and give advice and stuff like that. Again, you use somebody else's case, and you're getting the knowledge from that case, but you're not getting a lot more. It's not the same kind of information flow. Now, here's what I look at when I look at my capstone course, where we had a lot of cases that we had written. Well, first off, as I mentioned, 10 out of 11 cases, the practitioners were sitting in on the case. In a number of these cases, we get demonstrable evidence that the practitioner's decision-making was fundamentally affected by listening to the discussion. The students certainly reported being impacted by practice, and at least 2, and now I think 3 of our students have actually been hired by people coming from these organizations. And this is out of a class of 45. To get the practice to practice, I mentioned the fact that in one of the cases, I brought the company into our executive MBA program, where all of them are practitioners. And as a result of that discussion, a whole bunch of changes were made to this company. And this company actually drove all the way from West Palm Beach to Tampa, which is a 5-hour drive, just to sit in on the executives when they discussed their case. Interestingly, it's just the 4th time that this particular case has been discussed. Obviously, I saw my interaction with these companies as having a significant impact on them. Furthermore, I have now built relationships with these companies. That mortgage broker who I wrote a case study on, right now he's arranging my 2 3/4% 15-year mortgage, and the mortgage rate's gotten low enough so that I just had to remortgage my house, for the 8th time. I am now the world record holder on remortgaging because of my relationship that I've established with this person. If you take a look, of course, since the facilitator and case writer was pretty much the same person for a lot of these cases, obviously there was a lot of information going on. I also trained 3 faculty members and 1 doctoral student in case writing. I brought them in as co-authors. I held an extended workshop with them a 1.5 years ago. That's basically along the same lines of the extended workshop that we're talking about doing here for March. If you take a look, we've still got the strong faculty-student interaction. Now, what I would argue is if you take a look at a lot of today's schools, how many of you are experiencing or are concerned about budget cuts? Any hands? Yeah, you don't want to raise a hand because it's on tape, but yeah, I can see it in your eyes, the fear. This is a major concern, and for those of us in business research, we need to be very concerned because there is absolutely nothing that we do that is of particular value to the local business communities that we serve in our normal research activities. But I will tell you, when you start doing things like case research, you are really becoming embedded in the local business community. And I believe that schools both business and engineering and medical schools that go out and establish this type of relationship in the communities will see dividends, particularly if you're a state university, when someone wants to cut your budget. Because now all of a sudden you've got a constituency saying, now wait a second, these people are actually making a big difference. We see these faculty members. Yes, go ahead.
I was just wondering, as you were talking, does this also count as service schools?
Well, it probably, I'm sure that I could frame it as service, but since I'm already framing it as both teaching and research, it might, and the problem is, it's very, very difficult, and this is the way I like it. I like the fact that these things are entirely inseparable. Service, teaching, and research. When you're doing all of them and you're not thinking, oh, well, this goes into the service pot, and this goes into the research pot, that's good news as far as I'm concerned. People, one of the most embarrassing questions you can ask most faculty members is what percentage of your research makes it into your classroom outside of doctoral programs? For most faculty members, the answer is pretty well, let's say, if they reach the 1% level, they've gotten pretty high. I dare anyone to ask me that question, because if you take a look, I can say that at least 50% of the research that I have done in the past year has ended up in my classroom. And not just my graduate classroom, my undergraduate classroom, my master's classrooms, my executive classrooms. In fact, the only place they don't put me in with is the doctoral students, because I scare the heck out of them. The last thing you want to tell a doctoral student who already knows it's going to be impossible to get a job is that the research he does is also going to be useless as far as society is concerned. That's a downer. So I've only got one doctoral student working with me, and that's only because the rest of the faculty has diagnosed him as clinically insane. But he's great. He's great. He wrote a case study entirely on his own. One of the best first efforts I've ever seen. So, at any rate, this is a very, very different view of case studies. And the thing what you have to remember is don't just think about the document. Think about the relationships you're building. But you only do that when you go out in the field and start doing these things. So, bottom line, don't view discussion cases just as a simple product of case writing. It's the only thing you're worried about is a published discussion case. That will depress you beyond means. The first time I went up for promotion to full professor, my 40 discussion cases counted as much as a typo on my resume. They were even worse than blank space, because blank space has aesthetic value, whereas case studies simply suggested that my priorities had been misstated, or misplaced, that I was spending my time on the wrong things. Fortunately, I then wrote a couple of articles published in our top journal about why business research makes no sense whatsoever and why we're useless. But because it was published in our top journal, the promotion was easy, because they don't care what you say, they care where you say it. But if I had done all that stuff, I wouldn't have met Najib. But at any rate, so the benefits of writing a case come largely from the process. And once you've started doing it, I've got one faculty member now in particular who has said he's going to write a case every semester. He doesn't even teach a course with cases, but he really likes it, and he likes the fact that it puts him out there dealing with real problems. It reminds him of what we got into business research for. There are a couple of more administrative things I'm going to talk about, but just to find out more, on my personal website, I have a section called Case Project. So if you go to Grandon.com and then select Case Project from the menu, you will see something like this. It has a downloadable copy of my book. It has copies of the cases produced so far for the NSF project. It has a number of external links. This morning I added links for all the handouts for today's class. I also have submission templates for the Journal of IT Education discussion cases. There's actually a video from March's workshop, which was a lot like this workshop that's up there right now. This book can be downloaded in 3 different formats and so forth. Now, a couple of other things I just wanted to mention. I've talked about a workshop. As part of the NSF grant I got to develop this undergraduate capstone course, I said I would hold a faculty workshop. The way we're currently planning to do it is that we're going to presumably do it in March, and it'll run sort of in parallel with this conference with kind of 5 or 6 hour afternoon sessions. And the way it works is if you come from a U.S. institution, I can probably fund the hotel and the conference fees, not the travel, but the hotel and conference fees for about 20 people. So one of the things that I'm doing is I am passing around a sign-up sheet. I'll pass this around in both directions. And under any circumstances, please put your name, institution, that sort of thing on the sign-up sheet. But if you have an interest in participating in that, that's, let me know. I can't make any guarantees. I don't know how many people we're going to find, but I'd like to get some people who are interested. The other thing is that probably in January I'm going to apply for a larger NSF grant, which will focus on moving this process that we've developed out to other institutions. And so I'd be interested in finding institutional partners. Again, they have to be U.S. institutions, NSF requirement, not mine, and they have to be in a STEM field. I would love to get some people in STEM fields besides information technology, but basically, if you have any interest, obviously there's no commitment, just let me know, and then when it comes time for me to set up things, I'll start emailing people to find out whether the commitment is real or not. And there's more information on all these things. You can find that in the website. And if you don't sign up, you can always email me and just say, keep me posted. Let's see, what else? Yeah, I guess that's... I'll stop here and just open it up for any questions. I realize it's an interactive workshop. This hasn't been nearly as interactive as I would have liked, but 2 hours just wasn't enough for me to cover all the material. Go ahead, please.
Can you go over what the conclusion of one of these case studies looks like with respect to what the company gets out of it, and then also what the student gets out of it? If they have an internal reflection they write to solidify their increase in judgmentability based on the discussion or anything?
Well, the way I do it at the end of each discussion, they do, in fact, write a reflection. So that gives me a sense of what they've learned. In terms of what the company gets at it, most companies appreciate the opportunity to get an outside observer in there who can offer advice. And for some companies, I've been able to offer advice that was material and might have cost them a lot of money if they'd hired a consultant. In other companies, they derive the pleasure from the fact that they've got students discussing the case. Some companies are looking to hire students, and what better way to get a sense than to look at seniors doing a discussion? You could mark right off. They all have their name tags in front of them. You can mark right off the people that you want to talk to. So, and in establishing a relationship with a professor in the course, one of the things they also do is they can ask me to help them find people and stuff. So that's another benefit. Yes?
I want to mention another one. It's related to the reluctance of software organizations to document that. It forces them to put things down on paper.
That's absolutely true. And some of the companies that I've written cases on have actually used their cases to help orient new employees. Here's an example of the things we're looking at. Because any case like this is going to require some background of the company, context.
Level of context.
Right, exactly.
They wouldn't bother with it.
And sometimes I will create new exhibits that they haven't even seen of because I'll say, you don't know the market size for this. A lot of small businesses don't have access to all the database I do, so maybe I'll come up with an estimate. I mean, if it makes the case more interesting for students, then it does the job for me. So those are the types of benefits. I have virtually never encountered a company that was sorry they went through the process. In fact, I don't think I've ever encountered a company that said they were sorry they went through the process. But certainly the amount of value I deliver depends a lot on the context. And what frequently happens with these things is after you've done a case, they will become sufficiently interested in you that they will offer you consulting assignments. And I would say probably of the 40 cases that I've done, maybe 8 of them I've ended up doing some additional consulting for. And they understand the difference between unmetered, which is writing a case, and metered, which is consulting. And the thing is, I think consulting is a very positive thing because, once again, it keeps me engrossed in real-world problems as opposed to problems that appear in the literature. Any other questions? Okay, well, I don't know where Najib here has probably got the...
I'll ask.
Yes, of course.
Before.